Sarah never imagined a family trip would change the way she looked at her marriage, but the moment they pulled into the snowy Colorado lodge, she felt something inside her shift. She stepped out of the car while the freezing mountain air rushed against her cheeks, sharp and refreshing. It was supposed to be a relaxing winter getaway, a chance for her, her husband Mark, and his adult son Ethan to finally spend time together. But deep down, she already sensed this trip would be different. Mark had been distant for months, not cruel, just unreachable. Like a man living behind walls she didn't know how to climb. The lodge was busy, filled with families laughing, skiers dragging their gear, and fireplaces crackling inside large wooden lobbies. It all looked warm and inviting, but the atmosphere in Sarah's chest stayed cold. Mark handled the check-in while scrolling through his phone, barely looking up. She stood beside him, hugging her coat closer, trying not to feel disappointed when he didn't even glance her way. A few minutes later, the front door opened again, letting in a gust of cold air along with Ethan. At 24, he carried himself quietly but with a calm confidence she admired. He always greeted her kindly, always made her feel respected. He gave her a gentle smile now, one that instantly softened some of the tension she'd been holding. "Long drive?" he asked. "Long enough," she said with a small laugh. Mark barely acknowledged his son's arrival, only giving a nod before returning to the front desk. Ethan raised an eyebrow at the cold greeting, but he didn't say anything. Sarah had seen that look before, the look of someone who wished things were different but had stopped expecting them to change. In that silent exchange she realized how similar she and Ethan had become, both drifting around Mark like planets around a sun that kept dimming. The trouble started when the front desk clerk frowned at the computer screen and apologized for the mix-up. There was a reservation error. One room had a single bed, the other had two. Mark sighed loudly, acting like the world had personally offended him. "Whatever," he said. "Sarah, you just share with Ethan. He doesn't mind." Sarah froze. She didn't think it was appropriate. Not because Ethan was her stepson, he was an adult and they had a respectful relationship, but because it felt like Mark was pushing her aside without thinking, without caring how she felt. Ethan glanced at her, reading the worry on her face, and stepped in before she could say anything. "It's fine," he said gently. "Really? We'll figure it out." Mark was already walking away, answering another work call, his voice echoing down the hallway. He didn't wait for her response. He didn't even look at her. That small, careless moment hurt more than she expected. The room she and Ethan walked into later was small, warm, and dimly lit, with wooden walls and soft lamps that made the space feel cozy. But there was no avoiding the obvious. Only one bed sat against the wall. The heater was broken, confirmed by the staff, who apologized and promised a repair as soon as possible. With the temperature dropping outside, the room felt colder than it should have. Ethan insisted she take the side near the window, saying it offered a better view of the mountains. His tone was gentle, a blend of politeness and sincerity. He carried himself like someone who understood boundaries without being told. His kindness made her throat tighten, not romantically, not desire-driven, but emotionally, because she had forgotten what it felt like for someone to consider her comfort. She tried calling Mark to ask if they could switch, but he didn't answer. She tried again. Nothing. He was probably in a meeting or too wrapped up in work to care about room arrangements. She sighed, putting her phone down, feeling a mix of frustration and sadness ripple through her chest. As evening settled, they spent a few hours exploring the lodge, walking through its hallways decorated with winter garlands and soft glowing lights. Ethan talked about his college memories, his job prospects, and how busy life had been. She listened, grateful for the company. Mark stayed in the other room, saying he had deadlines to finish. He didn't join them for dinner. He didn't even check in to see how things were going. When they returned to the shared room, the cold felt even sharper. The heater repair crew had come and gone, but the problem wasn't fixed. The cold seeped into the room like a slow tide, creeping into her arms and legs. She rubbed her hands together, trying to stay warm. Ethan noticed and offered the blanket he wasn't using yet. She refused at first, but he insisted, gently draping it over her shoulders. The gesture startled her with its warmth, emotional, not physical. By the time they prepared for sleep, the cold made it clear. They couldn't sleep far apart without freezing. Ethan looked uncomfortable suggesting it, but he finally said, We'll stay on opposite sides. I'll keep a pillow wall between us. You don't have to worry. She nodded slowly, grateful for his maturity. They got into bed quietly, careful not to shift too much. The mattress dipped slightly under their weight. The cold pushed them closer, not by choice but by necessity. She stared at the wooden ceiling, listening to the wind outside and the soft sound of Ethan adjusting his pillow. She never meant for the moment to feel emotional, but something about being in that quiet room, lying beside someone who showed more care in one evening than her husband had shown in months, made her chest feel tight. She didn't feel attraction. She felt seen, an emotion she hadn't felt in a long time. After a few minutes, the silence grew heavier. She felt a strange mixture of comfort and guilt, like she was living a moment she didn't choose but still needed. Her heart beat softly, steady but filled with questions about her marriage, her worth, her loneliness. Then Ethan spoke. It was soft, almost hesitant, like he wasn't sure he should say anything at all. "Sarah," he whispered. She turned her head slightly, not too much, just enough to show she was listening. "Yeah. I know things aren't good between you and my dad." The words hit her like a wave, not because he was wrong, but because she hadn't realized anyone noticed. She swallowed, surprised by the sudden burn behind her eyes. Ethan wasn't judging her. His voice held nothing but understanding. It was the first time in a long time that someone acknowledged the truth she'd been trying so hard to ignore. Sarah stayed quiet, unsure of how to respond. She felt her breath become unsteady. The room was cold, but the honesty between them warmed a place inside her she had forgotten. Ethan continued. "I see how he treats you. Or how he doesn't." Her chest tightened. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady herself. She wasn't sure if she wanted to cry or pretend nothing bothered her. But Ethan's words were gentle, not harsh, not accusing. Just truthful. "You're not alone," he murmured. She didn't respond, but the silence after his sentence felt different. Comforting, supportive, unspoken understanding that traveled across the small space between them. She wasn't used to someone offering emotional shelter. That was when a sudden knock echoed through the room. A sharp, unexpected sound in the quiet darkness. Sarah's heart jumped immediately. Not because she was doing anything wrong, but because she had no idea who could be standing outside the door at that hour. The knock came again. Louder. More urgent. Sarah slowly pushed herself up, her heart pounding with a mix of confusion and fear, and walked toward the door, not realizing that the moment she opened it, everything in her life would begin to change. The knock at the door pulled Sarah out of her thoughts like a sharp gust of wind cutting through warm air. She hesitated with her hand on the doorknob, unsure of what waited on the other side. Her heart beat fast, not from fear, but from the weight of everything she was carrying. Ethan watched from the bed, sitting upright, his expression concerned but quiet. He didn't say anything. He didn't want to add pressure. He simply waited. When she finally opened the door, she found no one there. Just the empty hallway, quiet and dim, with soft lights glowing along the wooden walls. A gust of cold air slipped in. Maybe someone had knocked on the wrong door, she thought. Maybe it was nothing. But the disruption had stirred something inside her. Something she had been trying to ignore for too long. She closed the door softly and leaned against it for a second. She didn't want Ethan to see how shaken she was. But he noticed anyway. He always noticed. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, though she didn't feel okay. The silence between them was deeper now, filled with everything unsaid. She returned to the bed, sitting on the edge, her hands wrapped together in her lap. Ethan moved a little closer, keeping a respectful distance but staying near enough that she didn't feel alone. "Sarah," he said gently, "you don't have to pretend you're fine." His voice held a kind of calm honesty that made her chest feel tight. She stared at the wall across from her, trying to steady her breathing. "It's just been a long night," she said softly. But Ethan didn't look away. He didn't let the moment fade. "It's been a long year," he corrected, and the truth of his words made her throat tighten. She didn't want to break down. Not here. Not like this. But emotions had a way of rising when you tried too hard to push them down. She felt a quiet tremble in her hands, something she hoped he wouldn't see. But he did. That was when Ethan shifted, sitting beside her on the edge of the bed. He didn't reach out or move too close. He just offered presence, quiet and steady. It was a small gesture, but in her weakened state, it felt like an anchor. "You don't talk about it," he said softly, "but I can see it." "See what?" she whispered. "How lonely you've been." Her breath caught. She had never said those words out loud, not even to herself. She had tried so hard to be patient with Mark's distance, to make excuses for him, to pretend that everything was fine. But someone finally saying it, someone acknowledging her silent pain, made the feelings crash into her all at once. She swallowed hard, blinking fast to hold back tears. "Your dad, he's just stressed," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Ethan studied her for a moment, then shook his head slightly. "No," he said, not harshly, just honestly. "He stopped trying a long time ago. You've been holding this marriage together by yourself." The truth was painful, but she couldn't deny it. She looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap, trying to gather her thoughts. "I don't want to talk about it," she murmured. "That's okay," Ethan replied. "You don't have to. But you shouldn't carry all of it alone." His words were kind, but they struck her too deeply. She felt something warm and unfamiliar press against the cold loneliness she had been carrying for months. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't inappropriate. It was simply the comfort of finally being seen. She took a slow breath and stared at the soft glow of the lamp. She didn't realize she was leaning slightly toward him until she felt the warmth of his presence next to her. Not touching, but near enough to remind her that someone cared. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence felt gentler now, not empty but shared. The wind outside brushed against the windows, and the cold air seeped in slowly, but she didn't feel cold anymore. Finally, Ethan spoke again. "Why didn't he come to dinner?" Her shoulders sagged. "Work," she answered quietly. "It's always work." "He could have made time," Ethan said, frustration flickering in his eyes. "He just didn't want to." She flinched at the bluntness of his words, even though they were true. She had tried to ignore that truth for years. She stared at the floor, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe I'm not enough." That sentence made Ethan's expression shift instantly. Hurt, disbelief, and anger all mixed together. "Don't say that," he said, his voice firm for the first time. "You're more than enough. You've done everything. You've given more than he even notices." The emotions inside Sarah cracked open. A tear slid down her cheek before she could stop it. She quickly wiped it away, but Ethan saw. He didn't react dramatically. He didn't try to pull her into an embrace. He simply sat there, steady and warm, letting her know he wasn't going anywhere. "You deserve someone who shows up," he said quietly. "Someone who sees you." The words sank deep into her heart. No one had said anything like that to her in years. Mark used to be attentive, loving, thoughtful. But somewhere along the way things changed. He stopped listening, stopped looking at her, stopped choosing her. And she didn't know when it had happened. Now, sitting beside Ethan, she felt the reality of her loneliness more clearly than ever. Not because of him, but because of the contrast. His presence made her realize how absent Mark had become. "That's not your responsibility," she said, her voice trembling. "I know," Ethan replied. "But I care." His tone was steady, honest, without hidden intention. Just pure empathy. And in that moment she understood why it hurt so much, because she had forgotten what care felt like. She stared straight ahead, her heart aching in a way that felt both painful and freeing. For once, she didn't hide her emotions. She didn't pretend. She let herself feel. Ethan looked at her gently. "Can I say something without you getting upset?" She nodded slowly. "You've been walking alone in your own house," he said. "And you think that's normal. But it's not." The words echoed inside her like truth finally finding a place to rest. She felt her chest rise and fall with deep breaths, trying to hold herself together. But part of her didn't want to hold herself together anymore. Part of her wanted to finally let someone see her fall apart. She turned her head and looked at him. His eyes were soft, steady, full of quiet concern. There was no judgment, no misunderstanding, no pressure, just presence. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible smile on his lips. "Anytime." Though the room was cold, warmth spread slowly through her, easing the tension she had been carrying for so long. They sat like that for a while, side by side on the edge of the bed, speaking quietly about things she never thought she'd say out loud. Ethan asked gentle questions, not invasive, but enough to let her unravel some of the pain she had buried. And she listened when he shared his own frustrations with Mark, how he wished his father would be more present, more open, more emotionally available. The conversation was honest, raw, and strangely comforting. It felt like two people finally saying the things they had been afraid to say in front of anyone else. As the minutes passed, the emotional distance between them closed, not because of romance, not because of attraction, but because of shared hurt and needed understanding. It was the kind of connection that formed in rare moments when two lonely hearts recognized each other's wounds. Then, just as she felt herself calming, just as she felt her emotions settling into something gentle and steady, they heard a sound outside the door. A slow dragging creak. They both turned their heads toward the hallway. The sound grew louder. It wasn't a knock this time. It was footsteps. Heavy. Slow. Stopping directly in front of their door. Sarah felt her heart jump again. Not from fear of doing anything wrong, but from the unknown waiting outside. A shadow passed under the door. Someone was standing there, waiting. And Sarah knew without any doubt that whatever happened next would pull all of her hidden emotions into the light. The footsteps outside the door stopped so suddenly that the silence afterward felt heavier than the sound itself. Sarah and Ethan both froze. The quiet hallway seemed to hold its breath. For a moment Sarah wondered if she had imagined it, if maybe the long night had played tricks on her senses. But Ethan's eyes were fixed on the bottom of the door, watching the faint shadow that stood perfectly still on the other side. Before she could speak, the doorknob shifted. Once. Slowly. Then it clicked open. Sarah's breath caught as the door swung inward, revealing Mark standing there with a look she had not seen in a long time. Not anger, not sadness, but confusion mixed with something darker. He stepped inside without saying a word, and the cold hallway air followed him into the room like a warning. Ethan stood immediately, moving away from the bed. Sarah rose too, her heart racing. She knew how the situation looked, but the reality was innocent. Nothing inappropriate had happened. Nothing unkind, nothing secret, nothing that broke any rules. But the sight of the two of them sitting together on the same bed in a quiet room at night was enough to spark suspicion in someone already disconnected from them both. Mark closed the door behind him with a soft thud. "I tried calling," he said. His voice was steady but cold. "Why didn't either of you answer?" Sarah's phone lay on the nightstand, still on silent. She glanced at it, guilt twisting inside her even though she hadn't done anything wrong. "I didn't hear," she said quietly. "We were talking and talking," Mark repeated, his eyes shifting between the two of them. "Talking." Ethan stepped forward, calm but firm. "Dad, don't read into this." She was upset. "We were just talking." Mark didn't respond. His gaze landed on the bed, the rumpled blankets, the two pillows slightly out of place. It wasn't incriminating, but it wasn't reassuring either. The sight only deepened the crease in his forehead. "I leave for a few hours to finish work," Mark said slowly, "and I come back to find this." His tone wavered between disbelief and disappointment. Sarah felt her chest tighten. "Mark," she said gently, "you told us to share the room. The lodge made a mistake. The heater broke. We didn't have many options." He looked at her with eyes that were tired and hollow. "You're my wife," he said, "and you're sharing a bed with my son." Ethan stepped in. "Dad, I would never disrespect you." Nothing happened. But Mark's breathing had already changed, grown heavier, deeper, the way it did when he felt overwhelmed. He sat down in the chair near the window, rubbing his forehead with his hand. "I shouldn't have come," he muttered. "I shouldn't have agreed to this trip." Sarah felt hurt bloom across her heart. She took a step closer. "Why would you say that?" Mark shook his head. "Because everything feels wrong," he said. "Because I don't know how we got here." The words were unexpected. Among all the emotions she expected to hear from him, anger, irritation, jealousy, she didn't expect vulnerability. Ethan watched silently, giving them space, though he stayed close enough in case things escalated. Mark sighed and leaned back in the chair. "I haven't been a good husband," he admitted. "I know that. I know I've been distant. I know I've been buried in work. I know I haven't shown up." Sarah felt something inside her loosen, like a knot that had been pulled tight for too long. Hearing him say it wasn't enough to erase the pain, but it was enough to soften her anger. But walking in tonight, Mark continued, seeing the two of you sitting together. He paused. It scared me. Scared you? Sarah repeated softly. Mark looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time that night. His voice cracked slightly, because it reminded me someone else could show you the attention I stopped giving. Someone else could be there when I wasn't. The room fell silent. This wasn't a confession of jealousy, it was a confession of fear. A fear he never expressed, a fear he hid under all the work, all the distance, all the silence. Ethan lowered his gaze, suddenly uncomfortable. Dad, you're reading this wrong. I know, Mark said quickly. I know nothing happened. I'm not accusing either of you. I just realized how easy it would be for someone better to care for her more than I have. Sarah sank onto the edge of the bed again, this time overwhelmed by a flood of emotions she didn't have the words for. She had waited years for Mark to see her, to acknowledge her, to admit he had pulled away. And now, the truth came out in the most complicated moment possible. I didn't want someone else, she said softly. I wanted you. Her voice trembled. Mark's eyes softened. Ethan looked away, sensing the weight of a conversation that wasn't his to interrupt. Mark stood from the chair and walked toward her slowly. I know, he said. And I took that for granted. He knelt in front of her, something he hadn't done since the early years of their marriage. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry for making you feel alone. I'm sorry for making you feel like you're not enough. I'm sorry I didn't notice how much you were hurting. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. She didn't know whether they were tears of relief, pain, or exhaustion. Maybe all three. She had begged for this moment without ever saying it aloud, and now here it was, raw and real. Ethan cleared his throat gently. I'm gonna go check the front desk, he said. Maybe they fixed the heater or found us another room. Mark nodded, grateful for the space. Ethan slipped out quietly. The room felt heavier with just the two of them, but also calmer, as if a storm had finally begun to settle. Mark sat beside her on the bed. Sarah, he said, I love you. I haven't shown it, but I do. And I want to fix things. I want to be better. His voice was steady, but his expression was pleading. She looked at him, searching for sincerity. She found it. But trust was something different, something that wasn't repaired with one conversation. It was a long road. I don't know how to fix us, she admitted. I don't even know where to start. Mark took her hand gently. We start with honesty, he said. And presence. And time. She felt warmth return to her hands slowly, the warmth she had missed for years. The door opened again and Ethan returned. They found another room, he said. 2 beds. Warm. Ready. Mark exhaled with relief. Thank you. Ethan nodded. No problem. Sarah stood slowly, feeling lighter yet heavier at the same time. The three of them walked out of the cold, tense room and into the quieter hallway, where the soft yellow lights reflected off the wooden floors like a path leading somewhere new. Inside the new room, Mark placed the bags down while Ethan set his things on the second bed. The tension had eased, but something meaningful lingered. An awareness of a fragile moment that had forced truths into the open. As she settled into bed next to Mark, Sarah felt a strange mixture of vulnerability and hope. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if their marriage would fully heal. But she knew something important had happened that night. Not scandal, not betrayal, but truth. Truth that cracked open the silence and let light inside. Ethan turned off his bedside lamp and said quietly, "Good night." Mark whispered the same. Sarah whispered it back. And as she lay there staring at the ceiling, she understood something deeply. Sometimes the moments that seem like they will break a family are the moments that finally make everyone face what's already broken and what needs to be healed.